finally, a source of raw, real, and honest information on healthcare issues that matter most. Welcome to BS Free MD. From the latest medical information to how to stay sane as a doctor or a patient, no subject is taboo, no BS is allowed. Now, let's welcome your hosts, Doctors May and Tim Hindmarsh.
Hey, we're back and super excited to bring you another show this week. We hope you've had a great week. What can I say? It's festive out there. So I hope you're getting in the holiday mood, staying warm and staying healthy, because we're talking today a little bit about the big C word, but moving on into cold and flu season with RSV, influenza really hitting especially the kids hard this year. And we have a fun guest who is a very, I would say, what would you say? You call it very morally encouraging because he's really stood up for what he believes in, as well as sharing a little bit of some pediatric advice on how to keep your kids well and what to watch for.
Yeah, and this episode's maybe a little bit more controversial in some regards. And again, we're not practicing medicine. We're not giving you medical advice. Everything that we discuss here is because we like discussing stuff that sometimes is, on the edge or edgy or out of the normal, but we should be able to do that. And Paul Thomas is one of the most reasonable people I've met, and he doesn't have a license anymore. So
yeah, he was on our show back in August. And actually, if you're okay with going back and listening to that episode first, if you didn't hear it, he talked about his experience with his practice that is pediatric based. And in that episode, he talks about the data that he collected over the years as he noticed the different groups of children that he took care of. He had across the spectrum families that decided they would follow the CDC recommendations for vaccination, some families that wanted to pick and choose and do what we call staggered vaccine or choose only some, and some families that were completely against vaccination and chose not to do so. And he still stood by them after giving them informed decision making about their choices and took care of their kids. And the results, well, he talks about that in this episode too, are amazing. What happened after that, though, with the board in Oregon was not so positive. So that episode back in August, I'll have to look up the number.
August 17th.
Basically talks about his findings and how that landed him in trouble.
Yeah, and listen, we debate, we agree mostly now, with a lot of the stuff he has to say. I think it's hard to disagree with some of the arguments, but at the same time, doesn't mean we agree with everything that with him or with anybody for that matter. And
you agree with me 100% of the time.
Yeah, exactly. Whatever it takes. But make your own mind up. I think that's what we've learned is that the experts not necessarily experts. So let's get on with this show. It's really great, and we'll talk a little bit when we're done. Right, that's 3:14. So at the end.
And we're back. Welcome back to another episode of Totally BS Free MD. And we're super excited to have a guest back with us again, Dr. Paul Thomas, who is close to us in geography and has been on the show before talking about vaccines and his history with researching vaccines. We'll let him share the rest of his bio so that I don't botch it up. But this is going to be really hi, Dr. Thomas. This is going to be an update basically on, since we talked last, that was in August, and where things are at with you since we spoke last. And we'll get into some things on the RSV, flu and cold season with kids and what to expect as well. But for those who haven't watched the show before or listened to the podcast, because we weren't recording video back then, welcome. We can see your face. Why don't you tell everyone just a little bit about your background, what kind of medical practice you had and have now, and kind of how you got here briefly in the short Coles Notes Sparks version.
All right. Went to Dartmouth Medical School, got board certified in pediatrics, did my residency in California, taught residents and medical students for 5 years at Emmanuel Children's Hospital and OHSU residents here in Oregon. And then joined a private practice group for 13 years. In 2008, I left that group over the vaccine issue. I had come to a point where I'd become aware that certain vaccines really were mostly harm and no benefit. The easy one to explain that is the hepatitis B vaccine for newborns. When they moved that from teenagers to newborns in about 2001 here in Oregon, it was like, no, wait a minute. We know the moms are already tested negative for Hep B. Babies don't have sex or IV drug use. There is zero risk to the baby from the disease, but massive potential harm from the large dose of aluminum in that vaccine. Over that issue, my partner said, no, it's not ethical to not follow the CDC schedule. And I said, sorry, it's not ethical to give newborns whose moms are Hep B negative a vaccine they don't need that could potentially cause harm. So we parted ways. I started my clinic, Integrative Pediatrics, 2008, and started seeing some very interesting things. When you allow informed consent, you get some patients who don't want to vaccinate at all. You get some patients who vaccinate some. And I had some who were doing the CDC schedule. I started observing things that I thought, this looks like it might be important data. So I did an IRB, Institutional Review Board, to look at all my retrospective data in 2015, published some of that data in my book, The Vaccine Friendly Plan. That is a book that tries to sort of stay scientific about pros and cons about vaccines and give people alternatives if they don't want to follow the CDC, which, by the way, you guys know this, the CDC just makes recommendations. They are not a medical doctor or have a license to practice medicine, so therefore they can only make recommendations. However, our state boards and fellowships and academies, the powers that be sort of just adopt the CDC recommendation as the gold standard. And legally, it's almost reached the point where they think that's standard of care. So after I wrote my book, The Vaccine Friendly Plan, I started getting letters from the board. They were fishing. They had no patient complaints. That continued till just recently when I fast forward, I published some data at their request, by the way, January of 2019. They said, prove that the Vaccine Friendly Plan is as safe as the CDC schedule. I thought, wow, the CDC's never proven anything, that their schedule 1 year is better than the last one, nor have they ever looked at the total safety of the full schedule. Vaccine safety research is horrendous in this country or in the world. They don't use true placebos. They do very short studies. They don't do long-term follow-up, and they don't look at all health outcomes. So we really don't have any real vaccine safety research. So my study that I published to respond to their request resulted in some very interesting information, which was that the unvaxxed were incredibly healthy compared to the partially vaxxed or the more vaccinated. That led to, within a few days of that being available online on December 3rd, 2020, I get a call from my attorney, you have been emergently suspended. So overnight, actually within a few hours, they had an emergency meeting and bam, my license was gone. It was reinstated in June 2021. And just yesterday, formally, I relinquished my license to practice in Oregon. And that was after a lot of thought and deliberation and consultation with multiple attorneys. Every single attorney said, in Oregon, it's a kangaroo court. You cannot win. So what are you doing? It's a closed hearing in front of a judge appointed by the state. And even if that judge found in my favor, the board can still do whatever they want. And the extent to which they'd been after me, over 60 letters of requests from just the time I lost my license until a few months ago. I mean, it was absolutely endless. Sometimes twice a week, but at least once every 2 weeks, certainly once a month. I was getting a new request for something, sometimes new complaints, but they aren't complaints. They're just board manufactured concerns that they turn into a complaint. It really all boiled down to informed consent. They did not feel that we should be giving patients informed consent when it comes to vaccines. That's the bottom line of what all the complaints really were about.
So first of all, I want to say on behalf of physicians, your patients. I can't speak for your patients, but I can only imagine. I mean, I'm so sorry that it's come to this, because it's so sad when you have someone like yourself that is just presenting the facts. It's not even like you've made an accusation. You've presented the data as you saw it in your practice and published that. Then now you're literally hung and quartered and made an example of. And it's just mind-boggling that that's what you've done. You've just presented the science and the whole dogma of like, well, follow the science.
Right.
What we've been hearing for the last couple of years. Well, when you do that, then you get labeled back. They don't want that. I mean, clearly they.
But I guess the thing that just drives me completely crazy is, like, it's one thing if there was objective harms, like if your practice had this started a massive measles outbreak. Paul Thomas MD's practice is, Mary Mellon with typhoid infecting every place she works. She worked at in New York City, so that they had to throw her in jail because literally she would not, wash her hands.
Right.
Or you had a massive amount of, or even one patient complaint that was a legitimate complaint. Dr. Thomas told me that I was a blanking idiot because I vaccinated my. I mean, there's a million things that we can imagine that would be a substantive reason to get the board involved, because the board's job, or at least it's supposed to be, is to protect patients from practitioners that are, off the rails, that are, substance abusers, that are, so far out of line that they're harming patients or they're abusive or all of these things. Yet,
and I was going to say, and ironically, from the data you collected, the people that should be accused or looked at for causing harm potentially might be the ones pushing the vaccines on children, where they're having more health outcomes and illness down the road in their life. And like you said, vaccines have been so poorly studied in this country, in countries across the world, that it's just not out there. So it's a clear narrative push, and it's really sad. I mean, they don't want. They don't.
What's
want
the
us to have
motivation of the state? Like, that's what I don't understand. Like, I get it if you went to college with one of these guys and stole their girlfriend or something, but like, what's the motivate? Like, I do not understand that.
So you may have read or seen the National Federation of Medical Boards sent out, and we can talk about them. They are a private organization. They have no authority, as far as I can tell, other than the fact that they have money and they gave themselves this title, and they somehow have a hold on all the medical boards. So it must be some financial links. I don't quite understand it. It came out of the blue this last year when they sent a letter to all the medical boards that physicians should be disciplined and perhaps lose their license if they are spreading misinformation or disinformation regarding the COVID vaccine. Now, I think behind the scenes, they've been working on other vaccine narratives. So my vaccine-friendly plan and my data that was published in a peer-reviewed international journal was a real threat to the vaccine agenda. And so there's money, probably big money, backing the vaccine agenda and the whole more is better. It's the only thing it's hard to understand for me. If you have a better explanation for why public health officials, for example, what is going on with those folks when they say they look at the science, but they obviously don't. The science around COVID is so much easier to see. I mean, you just go to VAERS, you just read the literature. I mean, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of articles showing problems with the COVID jabs, and yet our public health people seem completely blind to it.
Well,
yeah, or even if you bring up or want to have a discussion, they get very defensive and argumentative, and that's the part to me. I'm like, we might not agree, but let's have a discsion and let's debate that. But that ends very poorly.
Well,
you just get shut down.
And the whole point is that you need to. The censorship is really what always gets me. Like, every once in a while I wake up and I go, am I the crazy one? Am I the one that's reading the VAERS data incorrectly? Am I the crazy one that misinterpreted the fact that they gave an EUA for a vaccine that only had, 210 events or whatever it was, which shows zero power. And I caught that right away. And we had an evidence-based medicine guy we used to work with that had worked at the state level in an organization that we worked in previously. And his response to me was not emailing me back. And
non-response.
So I sit there and I go, okay, maybe I'm the nutball. But what always brings me back to I'm not the nutball is the censorship. Like, you should be able to discuss this. Right. And when I think of the absolute nonsense that's gone on that I've observed in the 30 years I've done this, I mean, we had an integrative medicine provider that I had worked with who was inhaling cigarette smoke and then using a straw to blow it into the patient's ear or something like that, that would cause some sort of
oh yes, I remember
some sort of immune response that would make them not crave cigarettes. Like, it was utter nonsense and nothing happens to them. We have 15-year-old, very confused, very troubled children that can go into a gender clinic in Oregon and without parental consent be given cross-sex hormones. Completely off-label, entirely not studied.
Right.
So yet you question something where there is no data. And I would have never gone down the vaccine, wormhole or rabbit hole, as the case may be, if it wasn't for the COVID vaccine, where to me it was just so obviously egregious as far as the science. Then I started looking into everything else. We started talking to you. I read Turtles All the Way Down. I looked into, the Bandom Health Project from the Dutch folks that went into Guinea-Bissau. And I was just like, I got this wrong. We've been looking at vaccines it starts with the fact that we look at vaccines as disease eradicating agents. When there's been one disease in the history of humanity that's been eradicated, which is smallpox, and it took almost 200 years.
Well, and you know what? Smallpox was eradicated in places that there were no vaccines.
Exactly, because it's called hygiene. And
you know what? There were a lot of other diseases for which we didn't have vaccines that have disappeared for the most part. And so you can't give the vaccines credit like they've hoodwinked us to do so. And I'm not saying that all vaccines were of no benefit, not at all. I mean, there's no doubt the measles vaccine did a big number on reducing measles. I wanted to talk about the fact that, I didn't have a whole bunch of measles. We had that huge outbreak here in the Portland, Vancouver area. I did not have a case of measles in my practice that I was aware of. I learned later on that I did have one family in that community that was in Vancouver who were my patients. They just never came in. It went through their house. She showed me pictures, and one of the girls was pretty sick. I mean, you could just tell, but they all did fine. They survived it. It's so tricky when you start having these conversations about vaccine safety, vaccine side effects, the pros and the cons. We have to speculate, really, because we just don't have good data.
Well, and I understand, I give a little grace in the fact that it's very difficult to get this data. And the thing that really changed my perspective about 6 months ago was reading about this Bandom Health Project out of Scandinavia. I'm sure you're familiar with that. Dr. Abby and his wife, Dr. Ben.
The DPT data from Africa?
Yes, which is fascinating because there was a couple things that came out of that. Number one, measles vaccination was unbelievably powerful in preventing measles and all-cause mortality in that country, Guinea-Bissau, where there was very low measles vaccination, but an incredibly high measles mortality rate, like 5-6 times higher than what happens in outbreaks in the United States. Yeah. So they went in there in 1978. They studied all this, but what they discovered was if you got the live measles vaccine by itself, not only did you not die of measles if you were a kid, your all-cause mortality over time, because they've been doing this health project now for decades, went down for other diseases. So Dr. Abby goes, vaccines have effects other than the disease they're trying to eradicate. And And then he does this wonderful TED talk and he sums it up. He goes, we look at at vaccines as disease eradication tools, when what we should be looking at vaccines and all of these things we do to people is, how do you get the healthiest immune system to be able to live the longest and the healthiest? And then it just hit me. It was just like, ping. Vaccines are immune modulating events. By definition, getting a cold is an immune modulating event. The question is, what's the best way to have the best immune system to be the least ill and the strongest and the healthiest you can be? We don't ask that. We just say, there's a disease, let's kill it, let's patent it, and let's figure out how to make some money.
Right. And, you guys have now dug deep enough to understand and know that thimerosal injecting mercury was not a good idea for your immune system. Aluminum, there's books on it. I mean, Schoenfeld's book, there's books on aluminum and toxicity and autoimmunity. I mean, it's just all negative there. There's no benefit to aluminum. They're on balance, there's a lot more harm than good coming from vaccines, but it's not to say it's zero. So that's why I think it's important to understand that none of us are inherently anti-vax. We are scientists. And I think you would agree. You look at the studies, you look at the data, and then you have a discussion with your colleagues. You're right. We're censored. We cannot talk about this topic.
No. And, heaven forbid, I mean, obviously, you talking to your patients and having that discussion and saying, okay, here's the things that we know, here's the things we don't know. I'm trying to help you make the best decision, but this is something that you're doing as a doctor-patient relationship. And the patients are getting that information. I guess the board could be arguing that you're giving them misinformation because you're telling them that vaccines, might potentially not be as helpful as they could be, harmful long term, because we don't know, and they don't like that. That's the only stretch I can think of. But I want to talk a little bit about how this sort of played out. I want people to know how demoralizing and what happens when you sort of lose your license. And
I think she's saying, what does it feel like to be burned at the stake?
Well, December 3rd, or I guess it was the 4th, I got the call from my attorney. That was a blow. At that point, I had fought off about 4 different complaints from the board, and they had nothing on me. I had, quote, one, although only one of the 4 did they actually, what do you call it when they just say, okay, this one's close the case. So I had 4 open cases, and then they hit me with the emergency suspension and just manufactured a bunch of nonsense. So that was dealt with by the book that Jeremy Hammond wrote, The War on Informed Consent. He really covered that emergency suspension and their long list of bogus complaints and trashed them all with amazing science, highlighted the science that I had actually given them that was apparently, because hard to imagine it wasn't cause and effect since it happened within days. But anyway, it felt bad at that time. Since that time, when I got my license reinstated, and my attorney who helped me negotiate that said, Paul, there is no way they're doing it unless you agree not to do any research on patients, not to talk about any vaccine issues with your patients, and not to do well child care, because that's where vaccine discussions take place. So that was part of my stipulated agreement. That tells you what they're concerned about. They don't want they don't want data on children who might not be vaccinated compared to those who are. And they didn't want me in any way possibly steering patients in one way or the other. They want to just be able to have their agenda. But back to how it felt after a period of, I'm a glass is half full. So even when I've lost my license, even at that time, I'm facing a probable divorce, which I'm now divorced. And, a lot of family turmoil over Black Lives Matter. I have a mixed family, adopted kids. And I mean, there was a lot going on, and I'm losing my practice and potentially losing my practice, and my research, which was my other baby. It looks like it's getting destroyed. Yeah, I was a bit distraught. I've dug out of that, and I'm in a better place because of it. I think sometimes in life, when you hit bottom, you evaluate what's really important to you, and you're able to, in my case, what was most important is I was able to get in touch with my soul and my heart. I think I'd become a robot just working so hard. I could buzz through rooms, diagnose, treat, and I wasn't slowing down and meeting people at a heart and soul level, which now I have a better grasp on that. So that's a gift. I'll take that for the rest of my life and build on it. So how I'm doing today is pretty good. Today is the first day. I live in Oregon. I've been licensed in Oregon, and my whole career has been here in Oregon, 35 years. 1988 was when I moved here right out of residency from California. And so this is my first day not being licensed in Oregon, and I feel okay. I really do. The last month when I was seeing patients, a lot of them were just coming to say goodbye, basically. They would cry and we're so sad, and I'm comforting them.
It's your job.
Well, I think I had worked through it, right? And I've had 2 years to be working through how I feel about this and growing from the experience. But for them, it is a loss. They can no longer come, whatever gifts I was given, that I've been an in the trenches, direct care kind of physician my whole career. And there were things that I was pretty darn good at. So it's a loss for them, but I'm going to pivot. I'm not for the board that's watching this show, because they always are, right? I am not going to practice medicine without a license. My time, I'm still licensed, at least I think I am, in Washington and Hawaii. I've told them about what's happened, and I haven't caught up with my emails, and I saw there's one from my attorney from Washington. So there may be another shoe dropping there. We'll see. But I have no intention of practicing anyway. I'm going to go into teaching, education, possibly coaching, but no diagnosing and treating. So I'm done practicing medicine. So anything you hear on this show, anything I say, folks, it's just informational.
Yep. Same for us.
Yeah.
So,
well, it just pisses me off because you have someone who has a great skill set, career. Your patients clearly loved you. There was no patient complaints to the board. There was no harm to a patient. And isn't that what we're in medicine for? And it's all based on, they didn't like the data you published, basically is what it comes down to. That was data that you just found. It wasn't even confabulated or made up or fake news. And it doesn't meet the agenda. And so we lose another great clinician. And
yeah,
it's happening on the regular. I mean, one after the other, docs are getting burned out and picked off, and this kind of thing happens. So who suffers? It's the patients.
Well, it's the same person that suffers 100% of the time.
Right.
It's the patient.
Exactly.
Yeah. This is a guild. This is a ridiculous club with this insane, so you go to medical school, you sacrifice your young adulthood, you pay hundreds of thousands of dollars, you get a medical degree, you get residency, you go, and then you join the guild, and then the guild controls you, and you pay fees to the American Board of Pediatrics. That's part of the guild. And then you pay fees to the licensing, and then you pay all these fees, and then it's like, now just do what you're told.
Yep.
That's what it is. So the guild owns you. We need to understand this. Medicine is not science. I wish it was. It has a sciencey veneer like icing on a birthday cake, but it's not science. It's dogma. And dogma is not a bad thing if you can question the dogma.
Right.
So,
but what
did the Catholic Church want to do to Martin Luther? They wanted to burn him at the stake. Why?
Because questioned the dogma.
Yeah.
Because he challenged the dogma. He could have been entirely incorrect. And it would actually be good to debate him if he's entirely incorrect. But it wasn't debate. It was, he threatens our power because this, drunk German guy is spouting things that the church doesn't agree with. So let's burn him at the stake. I mean, Galileo, all these guys, it's the same story every time.
Well, it's frightening. But I think people understand that when we start picking off the people that have the patient's best interest at heart, and your patient, people like you now out of medicine, Peter McCullough, who stood up for patients with nothing to lose, gone. It's just happening.
No, with everything to lose. He had everything to lose.
Well, depends how we're thinking, how we frame it.
But that's the point. I mean, I'm sure.
What I mean is he had no stake in the game.
He wasn't selling anything.
No, exactly.
So, but I'm sure that you could have gone on bended knee to the Board of Medical Examiners and said, I was wrong. I'm sorry. I am terrible. I apologize.
Wrong about what?
And
that's what I'm sitting here. Like.
But I'm just, I want to frame this for people because I want people to understand.
He could have sucked up and kowtowed to their agenda.
I want to understand. I want people to understand this. I think is the most powerful part of what we're discussing. I want people to understand what moral courage looks like. You could have gone to the board, apologized. I will only preach the vaccine schedule. I will, if you want me to, dismiss my patients that are filled with patchouli oil and never want to have a vaccination, et cetera, et cetera. And the board would have welcomed you back. They would have had a stipulated order. They would have visited with you a few times in the future, and you'd be happily practicing medicine, doing what you did before.
I absolutely could have made a fortune. So one of the papers I published was the economics of vaccination. And just in my practice, I was losing over $1 million a year just in the admin fees for the vaccines I was not giving. I mean, we got some admin fees because I'm all about informed consent, and some of my patients want to vaccinate, they do. But
yeah, we talked about that on the last show in August. You were on about the cost and the payouts on vaccines, and actually how it's a big moneymaker.
So I want to get to this deeper part, though, because I find this so compelling and so encouraging to my soul personally. What was it that kept you where you just said, I can't not fight this? Like I see this as the truth, even if, you could be wrong. We can all, I said about our podcast, we reserve the right to be wrong. We're going to ask a lot of questions.
Yep.
But you're not going to go against what you saw, what you've written, what you've researched, what you've experienced. You could have made more money. You could have maybe had less strife at home. I don't know. But you said, no, this is the right thing. What drives you?
So even as a kid growing up in Rhodesia, that then became Zimbabwe, I'll tell you a little story that kind of speaks to my background. I was the head boy in the British system. They have this thing where in 5th or 6th grade, that's the elementary school, the oldest grade, the top male, which is a chauvinistic thing, but whatever. The top guy was the head boy. They didn't have a head girl. I don't know what that was about. It was a co-ed school. But anyway, the head boy was in charge of all the prefects who are the policemen for the schoolyard. It was a brilliant system. We kept all the kids in perfect control. Their ties had to be tied properly. It was a uniform kind of regimented world. Socks, knee-length socks just had to be just right. And I mean, everything moved smoothly and the teachers never had to do a darn thing. Well, my job also as the head boy was to raise the Rhodesian flag on Independence Day when they declared independence from Britain. And so Ian Smith had declared an illegal government to take total control of the politics there. And I was already involved in the resistance movement. This is back in the Martin Luther King era, civil rights. I'm just, 11, 12, something like that. And I refused. And I've asked my parents since, I said, what got into me that I would think to do that as an 11 or 12-year-old? Surely you put me up to it. And they said, oh, no, it was totally your idea. I said, you got to be kidding me, because I just didn't remember how I thought back then. And this is, well, you have to remember, Paul, Bishop Muzorewa, who ended up being the first African president of Zimbabwe, was a family friend. I mean, we sat in our living room and talked politics and taught resistance and, peaceful resistance. And so that was a part of my upbringing. But instilled within me was this thing: if you see a wrong and you don't do anything about it, you are part of that wrong. But it's actually so much simpler than that. It's not like I'm all this noble, great guy. I just plain old saw too much. So because I was open to listening to patients, and patients were telling me, you need to look at this vaccine issue. In fact, it was a local attorney, a couple, both were attorneys here in the Portland area. And I was their pediatrician, and they had two boys, teenagers, who were, to me, just a teens quirky. I mean, they weren't autism or Asperger as far as I was concerned. But the mom just goes, there's this Defeat Autism Now conference coming into Portland. I think it was 2003. Would you just go check it out? And I did. And I bawled my eyes out one lunch period when they showed video after video of normal kids around age 15 months become severely autistic within days or months and were nonverbal and, just gone. Video after video after video. And I thought, oh my God, I mean, how could this be? And so it opened my mind, that and Wakefield's paper. And so then I thought, vaccines might be a problem. Started looking at my own practice. And then I had 4 kids in a row, 2004, 2005, 2006, and 2007. My own patients, 1 a year. That's a lot of severe autism, right? But I had a growing massive practice. So I was getting about 30 to 35 newborns a month.
Ooh.
So, my partners were getting 1 to 5. So a typical practitioner is not seeing that many newborns at a time. So how often are you going to see a severe autism? Once every few years. It's like, oh, it's a coincidence. Well, I saw 1 a year. And so my mind's getting opened up to what the heck. And all I could tell them was good luck. We don't know what causes this. We wish you the best. That's not satisfactory to me. That's not okay.
No.
So I did a deep dive, and the more you look, as you all have done, the more you realize, oh my word, we have poisoned a generation. We are destroying their immune system. And then now I've got the data. I mean, real world data. As I hired an expert informatics pediatrician neonatologist to come in and do a QA, quality assurance. That's what we should do in medicine. If you're doing things differently, look at what it does. And he came out the first day and said, Paul, I can't believe it. The data just jumps out at you. And I'm not even supposed to be looking at this. Your unvaccinated kids just don't get sick. He couldn't believe it. And that's what we published. So when you've seen it that close, when these are your own patients, and I have actually my biological boys, I tease them. They're all brain damaged. Like sorry, kids, I poisoned you. But I wonder how they might have done if I was still following the CDC schedule for my kids. And there's stuff going on. My youngest one was borderline autism spectrum, but they all have severe ADD, ADHD, anxiety. And I have the data now from a much wider, thousands of patients. There's a real clear correlation. I mean, p-values are incredible. This does not look to be, it seems to be cause and effect. Association doesn't mean causation. I get that. But when you have multiple sources, you've got great data, it's corroborated by other studies, you've got mechanisms. We know how aluminum is messing up the immune system. We know immune activation is a big deal in pregnancy, especially, which is why, horror of horrors, they're adding more vaccines to pregnancy. This is complete insanity.
No,
we agree. And I think a lot of people, the majority of people would agree on that.
So what I've been doing, because I'm still working, and whether or not this podcast will have any effect on my ability to work, well, whatever. We don't vaccinate kids, so I'm kind of off the hook in that regard. But it's interesting because I very gently, when I see patients that come in with a sick child now, I talk about, it's not a big deal, unless it is, your kid has a cold. Well, yeah, but she just got over one. I said, you know what? And she's going to get over this one, and then she's going to get another one in then another 2 or 3 weeks. And that is okay, because her body is learning how to deal with what she needs to deal with in her environment. And then I write, if she has a fever late, if you're short of breath, I go through all the stuff where I'd want to see them again. And I'm just reassuring people that, we shut down society for 2 years, and now all of this stuff is coming back. And in the meantime, we added this COVID vaccination that has done who knows what to your immune system. And I guide them through. I said, these natural viruses are not the end of the world. If your child is not that ill, that's okay. We're just catching up and we need to get through it. Well, they need to wear 2 masks. I said, no, they just need to get sick once in a while, because they haven't been sick for 2 years. And that's a huge, huge problem. I never really believed that, coaching the immune system and all that. But man, with the reading I've done in the last, year and a half, I'm like, okay, I get this now. Yes.
I think we have a generation too that's coming up, and they forget that it's okay to have childhood illnesses and be sick. And I think the whole thing of pushing that immunizations and then all these magical antibiotics, it's like a kid should never get sick anymore. And if they are sick all the time for the first a year or two, well, that's kind of how I remembered our kids in daycare. And when growing up, it was like you always had something, or at least infants always had something going on. And then you build up your immune system, unless you were something else more concerning, where a child is continually sick. That's a different scenario. But I'm talking about little kids. People forget that infants and kids, yeah, they're susceptible to colds and coughs, and that's okay. But we've almost perpetuated this thing where, no, we have all these vaccines, and now, COVID, heaven forbid you get COVID or a cold, you got to get vaccinated for that. And, the whole push of antibiotic world is a whole other story.
And, I've had this conversation too. I said, because people don't understand. I mean, coronaviruses have been around for a lot longer than people. And most of the coronaviruses we had before gave you a cold. We've had SARS-1, now SARS-2, and MERS. We've had 3 identified coronaviruses that were really serious. One was incredibly deadly, which was MERS. But why do they go away? They don't go away because the coronavirus just decided that it was going to go to the Bahamas for the rest of its life and never come back. They change into something that's less virulent, and it doesn't matter. Well, once we crossed the Omicron threshold, I was like, we're done. Let everyone get it now.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But we didn't. We continue to stack on these, narrow vaccines, and we're funneling all of this mutation. It's just drives me crazy.
This group of viruses, we will never be able to vaccinate our way out of it because they mutate so fast. I mean, I'm not a virologist or immunologist, but I've read enough to know that. And we're talking about, they've identified over 2,700 variants of just the COVID.
Right.
So there's absolutely no way you vaccinate your way out of this. The other big thing that we doctors have been misinformed about, and now we're doing it to the public, is that it's all about antibodies. And it's absolutely not. The first line of defense is your cellular immune response, the T cell, not the antibodies. And this is why kids do so well. They have a robust innate immunity, and just let them get their protection. And some of them don't even get sick at all. I have had a busy pediatric practice throughout, stayed open almost the entire time. Very short period of time we went virtual just because of all the pressure. And, you guys probably went through that too, where you just couldn't really go open up your office because you were going to be seen as some kind of a dangerous physician.
Exactly.
But we opened back up very quickly after just a few months, and have stayed open. The big trifecta, right? You see it on the news now that's coming. We've got the COVID on top of the RSV, on top of the influenza. Well, let me tell you, this last month, I have been seeing basically only the sick kids because that's only what the board would let me see. Well, for me, economically, thankfully, there was lots of sickness, right? So I am seeing it all day long. I'm going in with coughs, colds, fevers. I mean, it's felt like the worst winter ever in pediatrics, and we're not even in winter yet. These diseases usually start in December and peak in January, February, and it feels like we were peaking already. But here's what we were finding. Lots of RSV. We do these tests in my office: rapid RSV, rapid flu, rapid COVID. I've got them all. So we do all these tests. We were seeing lots of RSV, lots of influenza A, and still some COVID. And then about half the time, we didn't know what it was, right? And that's how it's traditionally been, folks. If you're listening and you go to your doctor with fever, cough, and maybe body aches, headaches, you name it, it's like the flu. What percentage of those cases are actually the flu, influenza A or B? 5 or 10% at the peak, generally. That means if you had a perfect vaccine, which we never do, they're usually about 10 to 40% effective, you're catching 10% at the best,
Mm-hmm.
So that's why these vaccines, for one reason, they're not going to do much at all. But secondly, they're training your immune system to produce antibodies against that strain. And the strains shift, especially with the COVID and RSV. Those are viruses that are not going to do well with vaccines, and they're trying to do mRNA now for the RSV. They've been trying to do that for 20 plus years. It won't work. It's going to be a disaster.
Well, they tried.
Yeah, they tried, and it was a disaster.
Well, and it created ADE. I mean,
Yep.
like let's be honest. If there was a newborn RSV vaccine that really worked, that was sterilizing, it would be
we would have done it.
it would have been
Right.
amazing. I mean, it saved tons and tons of kids' lives.
So
Yeah.
what's your prediction? And Tim and I talked about this before, and I'm sure you would thought of this as well. Back 2 years ago when COVID hit, everything was locked down, and then all of a sudden, I couldn't believe it. I'm like, I think it was in the state of Oregon. There was 2 cases of influenza published, remember, in 2020? And we looked at, I'm like, is that even possible? Are they lying? You know, everyone was talking about, they're just lying and saying it's COVID. And the RSV rates went down. And we said, this is going to be frightening in like 2-3 years when this pandemic slows. What
Yep.
is going to happen is we're going to see a giant surge, which is what we're happening because people have been locked down. They haven't had the chance to get small doses of RSV and flu or get the mild case, and we're going to get hit really hard. And here we are. And not to say that we're that genius. We're not. I'm a dopey doctor, literally, that has just done family practice at urgent care for 28 years. But we could see what was coming, and I'm sure you did too. And
Yeah.
so people now are just shocked, and that's all you're hearing in the news, right? Is oh, surprise, we're overwhelmed. And it's worse actually than the numbers from what I'm hearing that of people working in hospital are saying it's even more overwhelming than even in COVID, especially with the kids units. So do you have anything to say to people, as far as with kids and with the RSV flu, what's going on? Obviously, you expected probably this to happen, correct?
Sure.
The rates to go up?
I did not expect it to be hitting quite as hard all at once.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I expected it would probably be bad. Historically, before there was a measles vaccine, you would have a measles outbreak in the community and everybody would get it. And then you'd have some herd immunity, really, the true old-fashioned herd immunity, because you had natural disease, natural antibodies that were very protective. It would take another 2-3 years before you had enough newborns and 1-year-olds and 2-year-olds who had never had measles to have enough people for it to go through the community again. You get another big old outbreak. Well, we've been through, like you said, a couple years of nobody being around each other. Quarantine works, but putting somebody in a bubble, they've done that research. It's deadly. We need to have exposure. I mean, we live in symbiosis, meaning we're at peace with one another with a host of organisms. And so this idea of it's a battle against pathogens is very mistaken. I mean, I'm glad we have antibiotics, but the vaccine program really, other than maybe a few exceptions, it's misguided.
Yeah, it's interesting because germ theory changed the world, and it was a wonderful thing. The whole idea of washing your hands in between surgeries, not a bad idea. That's a pretty good idea. Not examining one laboring patient and then examining another laboring patient without
washing
hand.
your hands.
Yeah.
Or Schimmelweiss, or however you pronounce it, and going from the autopsy room to deliver babies without washing your hands.
Yes.
Right.
But
Tim and I were talking about
there's limits to germ theory, even because not all bacteria and not all viruses are bad for you. That's, I think, what we're kind of agreeing on.
Yeah, Beaucamp, and it's the terrain, right? It goes way back then. You have a good biome, which, us MDs, we denied biome as anything. Oh, that's a bunch of hoo-hoo. And now we're even coming around to going, oh, wow, you have to watch out having a nice balance of bacteria in your intestinal tract. And don't wipe them out with antibiotics. They were onto something after all about be careful about antibiotics.
Exactly. Oh, where was my brain going? Oh, how even just the amazing simple thing of changing. So you go on vacation and you're traveling around to a different location. You're getting exposed to different viruses. You're on the plane with different people from, the world intermingles. How suddenly it's like, oh, I'm always healthy, and then I get sick. Or we took a new job, literally just in the different direction, south, instead of going north for 25 years to work. We went south 30 miles from home a different way. And we were so sick that first year because even just in that little bit of geography change, we got exposed to just a slightly different strain for a while of different viruses. And I thought, you would have think that doing this job for 25 years, repeated exposure in one place, you would be okay. But heck no, we switch and then we're sick again. And so the point being, when you lock people down, when you lock kids down and everybody's at home and they're not interacting, not going to school, and they're not commingling, and then boom, you open the door and release everybody again. What do you expect? It's just going to be a tidal wave of people getting sick because they haven't been exposed to things for a while, even if they are sort of in the same geographical region and known entities. So this winter is going to be tough, but people should kind of expect it. I guess my point.
Well, I'd like to give the listeners a little tip on how to get through this winter. All right?
Perfect.
Especially for kids. I'm not an adult doctor, but the same principles probably apply unless you have COPD or severe heart disease or something. You should have a pulse ox at home. They're these tiny little boxes. You can check your oxygen. And the reason is, for kids, it's respiratory. Whether it's influenza, COVID, RSV, it's going to be a respiratory issue. Are they getting enough oxygen? And secondly, don't let them get dehydrated. The only two reasons basically you end up in the hospital is if you need IV fluids, so you haven't been able to keep your child with drinking enough fluids. If they're a baby and they're nursing, you nurse even more than ever. You just stay on top of the fluids and you make sure they're not dropping so low on their oxygen that they're in trouble and they actually need oxygen support. The only other little tip I'd add there is if they're bumping along and struggling to breathe, but their oxygen's okay. So what's okay? It's interesting. So 97 to 100 is normal. Above 95 is great, is my opinion. I used to say if you get down around 92, 93, you better think about being seen. That's probably true. I had a patient, you guys are going to, I'll be interested in your input on this. I had a patient I saw in follow-up, a 3 or 4 month old with RSV. They had been sent home with an oxygen of 88.
Oh,
A pulse ox of 88 in a baby.
Ooh.
I mean, that's like shocking. But I think it's because in this instance, the hospital either didn't know what they were doing or they were full. They had no more beds. So generally, if you get down to 91, 90, you absolutely need to be seen. If you have a doctor that can handle it, go see your doctor first before you go to the ER. Urgent cares that are not staffed by pediatricians sometimes struggle with babies, but otherwise they probably are good.
Good points. People come in, when we've been working in urgent care and we put a pulse ox on and they see that it's 95, 96, take a deep breath, it's at 97, and they're like, oh, it's not 100. So then we obviously educate, because people seem to be panicked, if anything in that 95 to 97 range, for people, that's just
totally
so
fine.
I just try to reassure them. Exactly. And then especially kids, though, a low pulse ox, and my kind of line was always 92, 93, because kids can turn and go downhill and crump very fast. Whereas adults, you got a little more. I had people come in with a O2 of 68%, and they look like the blueberry muffin person, but kids,
but they'd also smoked 300,000 packs of cannabis.
So I like that point about the pulse ox and kind of what are safe numbers. I would say people are worried, and it is dropping below.
Yeah, the only caveat that comes to my mind as far as a pulse ox is if they have stridor. If it's croup, now you have an upper airway problem.
Right.
That's different.
They can have an O2 of 100 and then they have no upper airway and then they're dead. So if your kid is, obviously sucking in their chest and has this, sounds like they're breathing through a straw, have them seen, please.
Right.
It's usually pretty obvious. But
so you are perhaps old enough to remember epiglottitis.
Yeah.
Just barely. My father had intubated tons of kids. He was a family doctor before there was anesthesia residency, believe it or not. So he did anesthesia. And I'd ask him, I'd say, what did you do? He goes, you had a surgeon standing by, you hyperoxygenated the kid, and then you hit him with sucks and paralyzed them, and you shot for the last bubble. And I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I in residency, I intubated a lot of preemies. I was in a hospital where we didn't have fellows. It was just interns and residents, and man, we did everything. But I haven't seen a case of epiglottitis in 25 years. So stridor is almost always croup. It's a narrowing, pressure around the airway, and it's collapsing. And a good dose of steroids will almost always solve that.
Yeah. Can you quickly speak to dehydration and hydration in infants and kids? Because there's a lot of parents and patients who don't understand. They'll come in and they're like, I'm dehydrated. And well, are you urinating? Is it clear? Yeah.
Right.
But they don't feel good. So
Sure.
can you explain what to watch for in kids?
Yeah. So understand your kid doesn't feel good when they've got influenza, RSV, or COVID. Actually, in order of sickness, if they're really little, the RSV can be the worst, but otherwise the influenza seems to be making kids sicker than COVID. Just to put things in perspective, folks, because you've been terrorized by the news about COVID for the last 2-3 years. You don't need to worry about COVID. But back to hydration. If it's a baby, they can get dehydrated quicker than an older kid. And so you're going to really, with a baby, you're going to look at wet diapers, and you need to have at least 3 in 24 hours. If not, have the baby looked at just to make sure. What's I feel, and you guys probably can say what you want about this, but weight change, if it's a real thing, like when babies come into my practice, they get weighed naked if it's a well visit, or they get weighed naked if we're tracking weight carefully. We're talking about babies now. We're not making big people get naked.
I weigh naked just in case anyone was interested.
Yeah, well, yeah, after the shower at home in your privacy, yeah. But
I'm supposed to be private? Okay.
the show is just taking a turn.
Yeah.
You haven't seen enough shows, obviously.
I have not watched enough shows. But yeah, 10% weight loss, as physicians, we go, okay, you probably need support. 5%, you're probably just fine. Somewhere between 5 and 10%, that's where you got to look at your clinical markers. How lethargic, that is, sort of listless and out of it, is your baby or child. I mean, if they're getting so weak that they're not able to drink anymore, you got to go in. You're in trouble because you're losing the battle. But if you can get them to really drink, and this is where you don't want it to just be water. Water does not have any sodium or potassium or electrolytes. And if you can drink yourself into a seizure if you're not careful. It's rare, but I've seen it happen if you're just drinking free water. So hydration is what I emphasize. And, my patients, moms will say, well, I can't get them to eat. Are they drinking? While they're really, really sick, remember, one of the best ways to detox and actually fight infection is fasting.
Yes.
Right. So the body already naturally knows somehow to do that. Quit eating, but you do need your hydration. So if your child or baby is not eating, if they're old enough to eat solid foods, and they don't want it, just make sure they're getting their hydration. And breast milk's fine, by the way. But if you need to supplement and they're really little, we often talk about Pedialyte. I know it's a commercial product, but it's got the right concentration of salts in it. There's other ways you can go, but.
Yes, I always reassure them that it's the same thing. And most of if you're supplementing and you're adding Pedialyte or a little bit of diluted Gatorade, then you're getting glucose in there as well.
Well, you're getting
energy.
high in Gatorade. You're getting
high fructose corn syrup.
Exactly.
Exactly. And fever, as far as temperature, what's your input? Because that's another thing that people start to panic about. It's like, oh my gosh, I can't get their temperature back down to 90, 98. I'm like, well, they're sick. You're not going to.
I'm glad you brought it up. We do not need to be afraid of fever at all. It is the body's way of boosting the immune system and fighting the virus. When you get up to around 104, 103, 104 or higher, most kids get really lethargic or delirious. Yeah. And at that point, they look scary sick. So you do have to do something to get it down. I don't like Tylenol, acetaminophen at all. If possible, I would rather, when they're that high, go ahead and sponge them down a little bit. If you let water evaporate off your skin, so you kind of get a washcloth and you kind of like pat along the skin, just let it evaporate. Boom, a few minutes to 5-10 minutes, their fever come way down. And you can give some ibuprofen unless you're under 6 months. 10
Can you explain why you don't like the acetaminophen?
Acetaminophen blocks the production of glutathione. So glutathione is your major detox molecule. It's one of the major antioxidants. You need it to fight infection. So blocking that molecule is to me just a bad idea. The other thing about acetaminophen is the therapeutic window. So you need a certain dose for it to be effective, but then double or triple that dose and you're into toxicity. So it's got this real narrow window. And if you're dehydrated, even more risky.
Right.
So So I think, it's just one of those things we should probably just take off the market, but it won't happen.
Fascinating. I might have to do some research
Well,
because I've
which
kind
is-
of wondered over the years, and I don't know if you've noticed this, but the people that seem to push continued Tylenol when kids are sick, I'm like, man, they take forever to get well. It's like, how come this
Yeah.
is dragging out for 5 or 6
Well,
days? And
but
maybe that's why.
it brings up a supplement that I've been recommending to at least my adult patients, because I have no idea how to do this with a kid, which is N-acetylcysteine, which
Yeah.
actually promotes glutathione,
Yeah.
is
Yep.
the antidote to, Tylenol toxicity or
Right.
acetaminophen
Mucomist. You
poison.
can do IV Mucomist,
Right.
and you can cure a Tylenol overdose, right?
Right. And, we give it in 5-6 gram boluses, massive IV, drips of it.
Yeah.
And, I take 600 milligrams twice a day.
Yep. And you
And
can double
people
that
ask
if
me-
you're in.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know what the safety profile is on
Oh, no,
children.
children, I have no concept, but I know for adults, I take 600 twice a day. And then I do that xylitol nose spray. People ask me, how come you don't get sick? You see all these sick people. I said, I don't know, but this is what I do.
Yeah. No, that's a very smart move. And then if you happen to get sick, you'd probably double the dose of glutathione. I mean, the N-acetylcysteine.
Yeah.
You can give it to kids, I think, probably to any age. You just got to sort of per kilo dose it, right? Sort of titrate it down. But the problem is it tastes horrible. So unless you can swallow pills, I mean, it's like rotten eggs. It is one of the hardest things to disguise. There's a little chewable called Dehist Junior, and it has 15 milligrams of NAC. I mean, it's not much.
No.
But it tastes okay, and it also kind of acts as a natural antihistamine kind of thing. So, you could swallow 5 or 10 of those, and you'd get some in that way. That's one way. Yeah, but it's hard to get that into people who can't swallow pills yet because it just tastes so bad.
And do you recommend any preventative vitamins or supplements for kids during cold and flu season?
Oh, absolutely. Everybody needs to be aware that your vitamin D level will tank if you're not supplementing it. I know if we lived closer to the equator and we were outdoors with our shirts off, we would be probably fine for vitamin D.
We call that life
I was going to
goals.
say Tim would be distracted is what would happen.
That is our new life goal.
Yeah, to be by the equator with your shirt off.
Yeah, exactly.
So you need to supplement vitamin D, and you need to actually take enough to get your levels into what I call optimal levels. Normal is 30 to 100, but optimal is 50 to 80. Any integrative doctor I speak to, we all agree that's where you want it to be. And that's based on hundreds of studies showing cancer prevention at those levels.
So not just for adults, but kids too.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely, especially in our neck of the woods where it's gloomy, gray, and gross.
Even pregnancy. There's no reason you can't take it during pregnancy, in my opinion. Again, I'm not giving medical advice, but I've been doing this work for 35 years. Yeah, I give infants 1,000 IUs, and I'm giving teenagers 5,000 IUs with K2. Okay, there's some interesting research if you look at all the vitamin D research, and MDs are notorious for cherry picking what they want to highlight. There's some negative efficacy stuff. There's where vitamin D seems to be causing harm. I think the harm comes when it's high dose without K2. You're also absorbing calcium, and that calcium, I wonder what extra calcium floating around your blood vessels might do to atherosclerotic plaques. I don't know, but there just seems to be some bad studies there, or they just are underdosed, so they don't make any difference. So say, it's worthless. No, you need enough to get those levels up.
Right. Perfect.
Yep. And check your levels. It's easy to check vitamin D levels.
Yeah, very easy.
Well, that was really helpful. I'm glad we ended with those tips at the end.
It ended up very positive. And,
well, look at that. Some BS-free doctors who are rebels speaking to the guy that just lost his license, and we ended up on a positive note. This is amazing.
I know it really, it's a Christmas miracle is actually what it is.
That's what it is.
Because normally I'm just
Christmas
ranting.
Spirit.
Yes, but the ranting is, but this was very, very
People
good.
Seem to love your ranting.
They do love the ranting.
Sorely dismayed.
But my blood pressure does not like my ranting. So, nonetheless, we know you have to go, Dr. Thomas. It's been a pleasure talking to you again. And again, I really want to emphasize to people, moral courage. We have met so many people in the last couple years doing this that are morally courageous, and you are at the top of the list for sure. And we are humbled that you gave us this time to be able to discuss your case. And again, some practical things as we go into probably the worst part of cold and flu season. So thank
Yeah.
you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome. And it's always fun being on with you too. So bring me on again sometime.
We absolutely will.
Yeah, we will definitely catch up and see what you're up to in the new year.
Yeah, I'm starting a program called Kids First Forever. So it's kids first, the number 4 ever.com. It's not well developed yet, but this is going to be a place where we can kind of continue the good work, but not in a diagnose and treat way.
Okay. Is that the best place for people to, if they want to look you up and find anything more about you, is to check that website out?
That one's just being developed. The other
Okay.
great one would be doctorsandscience.com, which is
Okay.
the website for my show.
Yep.
And I have links on there to scientific information, articles, some of my presentations.
Yes.
So people who want data and other information, doctorsandscience.com, all written out.
Yeah. And I think I linked that before in August, so I will put that again in the show notes for everybody to find.
Fantastic. Happy holidays, you two.
Same to you.
And
Same
all
to
you
you.
listeners. Wishing
There
you
you
all
go.
the best.
Absolutely.
Stay well.
Wow. Moral courage. That is really fascinating. There is like these outliers that have this, I can't stand something being wrong or unjust or whatever the case may be. And they're not common. They're out there. I mean, Peter McCullough is one of them. Paul is clearly one of them, whether you agree with him or not, is really beside the point. I thought the whole concept of moral courage was really the most amazing. It's like there's these Joan of Arcs. It doesn't matter what you do to them. They will 100% stand up for what they believe is right, even as they're being consumed by the flames. And
I really
that
like the fact
is
that he
really powerful
believes that
to witness.
pushing agenda that he doesn't believe in is completely wrong and refuses to do so. I really respect that.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be really easy to bend over. Actually, from the Board of Medical Examiners perspective, it would be great for them because then they don't have to fight this and it goes away. They win a battle. Everybody's happy.
Which makes you wonder how many people are out there that have done that. Quite a few.
And it also makes you understand how movements work and how it really is 2-3%. Once you get 3 or 4% of your society to sort of switch over and challenge the narrative in their lunchroom and at their PTA meeting, those things are what really change the world.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate in this conversation because that's what I do. Because I'm thinking of the people listening to this, trying to extrapolate that and push it forward into their own life where they're living, and not just in the medical world standing up, but in whatever industry or wherever they're living. And sometimes for people, they want to be able to do that, but it's very difficult because of the risk involved, including completely losing their jobs. And we've seen that time and time again, correct, right? With healthcare workers being fired and walked out the door because they refused to follow the vaccination guidelines or the testing requirements because they didn't believe in it. But some people really have to make tough decisions, whether it's putting food on the table.
No, and I respect
versus having to just suck it. I wouldn't say suck it up, but it's a hard decision. And so I'm not saying, I don't think you're saying that every single person has to just say screw you to whoever.
No, I don't
every
think
time
that's
to have moral courage.
I don't think that's
Right.
the issue. I think that for every Moses, you have a million Israelites. But what people don't understand is, apparently, if you look at some ways to interpret the Hebrew scriptures correctly, is that only about a fifth of the Jewish slaves followed Moses. So it was 20%.
Mm-hmm.
And of that 20%, most of them were followers, but they were willing to follow. So I think where you really change society is you have lightning rod people, you have the Joan of Arc people, and they motivate people that are in their lunchroom that agree with them mostly, but they're not really willing to say, fire me, screw you to the boss, that kind of stuff. But what really changes your society is when those people that kept their jobs, maybe they got vaccinated, maybe they went along, whatever, it kind of made sense in their metric and in their moral framework, but they still don't really feel good about it. When they say, I don't know if I totally agree with Paul Thomas, but what he says makes a lot of sense. And I think that he should have a right to say that. And if patients want to see him because they feel like he's a great doctor, they should be able to do that. And he shouldn't have his license taken away. But, I might choose to take my kids someplace else. But that conversation is still important for them to be able to have. That's what changes the arc, is people going from shutting up to get along to sticking up for themselves just a little bit. Okay. This is exactly what happens in habit formation when you quit smoking or you start exercising. You go from a place where I feel a little bit different and a little bit better when I do X. So now I'm going to do X more. And then you're fitter and you're lighter and then you keep doing it and you keep doing it and you keep doing it. And that's the encouragement. I think people get really discouraged because they see heroes and they understand that they're not a hero. And you know what? They're right. They're not a hero. You don't need to be the hero and the lightning rod. You need to be a little tiny bit of a hero when you get a chance. When that sense inside you is like, I really want to disagree with this guy, but I don't know how to do it and I don't want to get in trouble. You to go, yeah, but doesn't he have a right to say that? I'm not sure how much of it I agree with, but I think he has a right to say that. You should just start there. And then the next time it's a little bit easier. And the next time it's a little bit easier. Because you are what you do. And if what you practice is backing down 100% of the time, you will back down 100% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the change. And I think, we try to inspire people by saying, look at this moral courage. It's amazing. But at the same time, I don't want to discourage people because most of us can't do that. I get it. I counseled tons of my friends. I said, would you get the vaccine? And it's like, yeah, I got to fly out of the country to see my grandkids. Yeah, I'd probably do it. I think it's dumb. It's, you don't need it, but it's probably not that dangerous that in that metric, it makes sense to balance that risk against that benefit. I get it. That's life.
Good. Just wanted to make that clear. And I'm glad you did that, I think.
You're glad I did that, I think. That has actually been the theme of our entire 30-year marriage.
My brain might have
glad
wandered.
you did
My brain
that,
might have wandered
I
a little
think.
bit as you were giving your dissertation there. But I just let you talk to see where the trail was going. And I think it came out to the same place I was at. It was very windy, though.
But it's deliciously windy. It's like an F1 race course.
I'm a little dizzy from that trip, but...
you're going 200 miles an hour down the straight stretch.
That's
and
me.
You got to get on the brakes.
That's me.
Take a hard right and then a hard left and then a hard left.
No, we took
Look, it's an overtaking. Hamilton is overtaking Max Verstappen.
No, you took us on the Little Red Riding Hood journey. Anyway, you can keep wearing the cloak, and let's get to the end of the show.
Okay, I think we're done for this week. So, anyway,
wrap that up, put a bow on it, stick it under your tree, and we will see you next week. It's no secret that medicine is a bit uptight. That's why Tim and I created BS Free MD, to mix things up a little and have fun in the process. Besides, we are having these exact same discussions all the time, so we thought we might as well invite everyone to the party. If you really like us, you can get plenty more and maybe see one of Tim's cool tattoos on our Instagram or Facebook pages at BS Free MD. See you next time.
While we try to keep BS Free MD as raw and real as possible, we can't be held responsible for any medical decisions or discussions had as a result of what you've heard on the show. We know, bummer. But the truth is, we really do care about your questions. So feel free to reach out to us by email at doc@bsfreemd.com.